This is note taker 18 on viruses. As a quick review from note taker 17, we have 8 hierarchy groups in our classification system. We have the domain, the kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. With our modern day classification system, we have 3 domains. Our first domain is called Archaea, which means ancient. And the domain Archaea is going to have one kingdom called Archaebacteria. That's going to be one of our bacterial kingdoms that we're going to study. The second domain is domain Bacteria, and it has one kingdom called Eubacteria. That's going to be our second bacteria kingdom that we will study. And then our third domain, which is the largest, is called Eukarya. They are called this because everything in this domain is a eukaryote, which means that if you were to look at the cells, they would actually have a nucleus inside the cell to protect their genetic material. Domain Eukarya is actually going to have 4 kingdoms in it that we're going to study. You will have Kingdom Protista, Kingdom Fungi, Kingdom Plantae, and Kingdom Animalia. So now, you had the quiz on classification system, and we are going to look at the breakdown for something that is living. Now in 17, we looked at the breakdown for the great horned owl. But here, just as a reminder, I'm reminding you about scientific names, the Arctic wolf breakdown would be domain Eukarya, because it is an animal who has a nucleus in its cells, Kingdom Animalia, because it is an animal, Phylum Chordata, because it has a backbone, Class Mammalia, because it is a mammal, Order Carnivora, because it is a carnivore, Family Canidae, genus Canis, both of those words fit into a dog category, and then species Lupus, which means wolf. So its scientific name is Canis lupus. For the rest of the third 9 weeks, we are going to be breaking down and studying our kingdoms of life. However, before we start with our first kingdom of life, there is one topic we have to cover, and this is something that is not living, and we are going to study viruses first. Viruses do not fit into our modern day classification system because they are not living. And since they're not living, they do not get scientific names. Viruses are just microscopic particles that actually invade living cells and can cause them to either become sick or, worst case scenario, die. Now with our viruses, because they are not living, they are not cells. They cannot carry out the life processes. The only life process that a virus can do is reproduction, and it cannot reproduce on its own. It must have a living cell called a host, which it invades, to be able to reproduce. And because viruses harm most of their host cells, sometimes we consider them to be parasites. However, this term is not 100% true, because a parasite is something living that attacks something else. So for viruses, well, we're kind of using that term a little loosely. Now, we study viruses because viruses infect all 6 of our kingdoms of living things. There are some viruses that will attack bacteria, some that will attack protists, fungus, plants, and there are viruses that affect the animal kingdom. A virus has 2 basic parts that you see below in this picture. It has a core on the inside of genetic material. It will either have a strand of DNA or a strand of something called RNA. And then it has an outer protein coat, which is in the picture, that weird little hexagonal figure at the top. That protein coat is what protects the genetic material inside. Now, depending on which virus you're talking about, the protein coat can actually be a different shape. And that shape is what identifies it and allows it to attach to the host cell, the living thing, that will be infected by the virus. So when you have a virus that attacks us, if it were to get into a plant, it may not attach to a plant cell because the protein coat might be the wrong shape for a plant cell. Now the one in the picture below also has something that looks like a body and some legs. Not all viruses have this. Actually, most of them do not have this shape. But they will all have the protein coat and genetic material. Now, how a virus reproduces. The reason a virus infects us, the whole reason, is to reproduce. Viruses do not eat. They do not excrete, so they don't need nutrients. So unlike something that's living, the only thing that the virus wants to do is make more viruses to infect more living things. So I'm going to use as an example a virus that infects something called, or the virus itself is called a bacteriophage, and it is actually a virus that infects a bacteria. So how it works, I'm going to explain it first, and then on the next picture, on the next slide, there will be a picture that shows you a diagram of how this works. The bacteriophage will actually attach to the bacteria with its tail, and it looks a lot like the one in the picture on the last slide we looked at. And like you going to the doctor and getting a shot, the virus will inject its DNA into the bacteria. Now, once the DNA is inside the bacteria, it tells the bacteria's DNA to stop working. Well, the bacteria, being a living thing, needs functioning DNA. So it recognizes the virus's DNA, and when the bacteria starts to go to reproduce, instead of making more bacteria DNA, it starts making copies of virus DNA. And it works like a copy machine, where it just keeps on making copies and copies and copies. And some bacteria can become filled with hundreds of new little viruses. Now, what happens next will depend on what type of virus it is. Some viruses do not kill the cell that they're infecting because they want to keep using that cell to reproduce. So they will actually release the viruses from the cell in a very non-harmful way. However, there are some viruses that are evil little things, and they will actually fill up the bacteria cell or fill up the cell that it's infecting until there are so many viruses that the cell bursts open, releasing the viruses, and the cell dies. This diagram shows one of those nasty little viruses. So the virus, which in the left side of the picture you can see are the little green things, and then this is showing a human body cell. So the virus enters into the cell, and its DNA gets into our nucleus and tells our DNA, stop working. So then our nucleus starts making copies of the virus DNA instead of ours. And then as our cell fills up with all these new little viruses, eventually the cell is too full and the cell bursts open to release those viruses. Now the cell, the body cell of ours that the virus was using, is now dead. And each one of these little viruses it releases will go on to attack another one of our body cells. So this would be a virus that would eventually be extremely harmful for us because it's destroying our cells as it makes new viruses. Now, some of the viruses that we have cause diseases such as the cold. If you've ever had the flu, that's a virus. If you get fever blisters on your lips, that's a virus. Some of the worst ones that we have, AIDS is a horrible virus. That virus that causes AIDS shuts down our immune system, so our body can't protect us against things that would make us sick. So somebody who has AIDS, they could get something like a cold or get strep throat or something like that, and it would actually kill them because our body can't fight off the other diseases. Measles is more of a childhood disease. You don't see measles very often anymore. Encephalitis is pretty bad. That's a virus that is going to affect your up in the head around the brain cavity. So these are just some of the diseases that we can suffer from. Now, a few of the diseases will cause us some discomfort, like with the cold, you might get a little fever, runny nose, stopped up head, but not every virus is that nice. There are quite a few viruses that are deadly, that once you have them, there's nothing they can do to help you. The end product will be death. Now with viruses, because they're not living, you can't kill them. You can't kill something that's not alive. So currently today, there are no cures for any of the viruses that we know about. You can, however, treat the symptoms. So the best thing for a virus is getting plenty of rest and drinking lots of fluid. The fluids keep your body hydrated, and the rest allows our body to try to fight off the virus on its own. Now, viruses, we have found some that have been used for good. If you've ever had a vaccine, these are weakened, and I shouldn't have put killed in here. It's usually an altered virus. They'll go in and alter the DNA a little bit. So they can make a weakened or altered version of that virus with its DNA, and they can actually use that to make a vaccine. The first vaccine was actually created by a gentleman named Edward Jenner. He was a doctor back in the 1700s, and he created a vaccine to protect the people of that time from smallpox, which was a deadly disease. It was a relative of chickenpox, except smallpox, the end result was death. You were not getting better from smallpox. Now, he found that people that worked with the cows, and there was also something called cowpox that cows got. But the people that worked around cows would get a minor case of cowpox, but because we're human and not cows, our body could fight that off. So he was able to take the blood from these people who had gotten better from cowpox, and he was able to make a vaccine that protected us from smallpox. Now, with a vaccine, how a vaccine works. When you get like a flu shot, so I'll use the flu shot as an example. So each year I get a flu shot. The flu shot is made from a weakened or altered form of the flu virus. And when they inject that into my body thinks I have a case of the flu. So my body builds up its defenses to fight off the flu. However, I don't get the flu because the virus has been weakened or altered. So my body has built up the defenses to be ready to fight it, but they don't need it yet. So then I come to school and one of you that has the flu sneezes on me. You give me the flu virus, and instead of getting the flu as bad as you had it, my body, since I had the vaccine, already has my defenses in place to fight off the flu, so I may not feel well for a few days, but I'm not going to get the full-blown case of the flu like you may have had. Viruses are also being used in gene therapy. This was a topic that we did discuss when we talked about genetics, and how gene therapy would work is they're taking the virus's DNA out of a virus and throwing it away. Taking healthy DNA from someone without a genetic disorder, putting it into the virus, and then injecting that virus into somebody who has a genetic disorder. And what they're hoping is the good DNA will take over the bad DNA that's causing the genetic disorder in the person. This is still in the works, and there's a whole future ahead in this type of career. Now, I mentioned earlier that your body can form defenses when you get a vaccine. Your body does have natural systems for fighting off a virus. It needs to, because there is no cure for it. So what will happen is the first thing your body will do is it will send white blood cells. They're our first line of attack. In addition to your red blood cells floating around inside your blood, you have white blood cells. They know when something is in your body that doesn't belong, and they will rush to that spot. They will surround the thing that's not supposed to be there, and they will try to dissolve it and eat it, just to get rid of it. That's our first line of defense. Our second line of defense are antibodies. Antibodies are chemicals made by the body that will go fight off the thing that's not supposed to be in us, like a virus. And our third, and probably one of the last methods that our body want to use, is something called interferon. Interferon is a protein that stops viruses from being able to attach onto other cells. But for us to use interferon, some of our cells do have to give up their own lives. So I might have one cell that's being attacked by a virus. It will create this interferon, and then the cell will almost burst or explode, and it will send this protein, and it's almost like chapstick or like a thick honey or something. What will happen is that interferon will cover or coat our other cells. And when that covers our other cells, the virus can't find a place to attack or attach onto those other cells, so those other cells are safe. But unfortunately, that first cell that created the chemical had to die to save the other cells. This is the note taker on viruses. Please do not forget to complete the assessment that follows.